came in December of 1970. And I first came in, I was working in Upward Bound. I took over the directorship the following year.
Wow.
And
moving up in the world pretty quick, huh?
yeah. And I was working with Upward Bound. I got involved in student support services probably 2 or 3 years later. And we've helped grow both programs pretty well here. Actually, with our leadership, it's been pretty interesting. Since I came in, we've literally had 2 people, and you know them both.
Yeah.
And I think that helps.
What about before you? Was there?
There was like 3 or 4 different people did it.
Yeah.
Upward Bound was part of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. And we have one of the oldest programs. We were part of the original group that got funded.
Right.
And that was in 64, 65. And we have been continuously funded since then. I don't think there's too many others that can talk about that, being continuously funded from that early.
Right.
Some have lost their funding as we've gone along the way, have recovered it. So we're pretty proud of the fact that we were able to just keep funding. And that's kind of where I learned how to write grants. It's, you better learn or you don't get your funding.
Right.
That's a pretty big inducement for that.
Do you know what year we picked up the SSS grant?
It probably might be 70, 71. And we've been continuously funded since then.
What about McNair? Do you know anything about that?
McNair, I helped David Singranelli write that one. We wrote that one. That one's a little, probably at least 20 years ago. But that was a program where, that's one of my favorites, because we're helping a lot of minority students proceed to the doctorate. And the first year we wrote that grant, we didn't get funded, but then we reapplied 4 years later and got funded. And so that's been funded since then here.
And then we have what's the last one we have?
Talent Search.
Yeah, Talent Search.
That was earlier than Student Support Services. I think Upward Bound was the first one. Talent Search came in pretty soon after that, because that was running when I took over Upward Bound. And then but actually that first program with Talent Search was a City of Binghamton program. So I ended up writing a Talent Search grant that we got funded probably in the middle 70s. And then that was, first they had the City of Binghamton program, and then we got the Talent Search going. I remember that was probably middle 70s, something like that.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that there have been, a lot of changes with the change in leadership, and there hasn't really been a lot of change in leadership. But since the program, you first came to the program in 1970, what's changed since then?
The one with Upward Bound is that it became more emphasis during the academic year. Probably it was conceived of being more of a summer program early on, and then it became a bigger emphasis was placed on the academic year, which makes perfect sense, because you were working with students during the summer, and then if you didn't have much contact with them during the year, it was pretty hard to maintain whatever you gained during this summer. So that was a big change, and we have kept that going to the point where we've done an awful lot more tutoring, contact with the students, people out in the high schools, as you see now, where you've got people out still doing that stuff. I think it's extremely important. Obviously, the programs have gotten bigger, and then now we have the 2 Upward Bound programs, and I helped, even after I left, I helped write that second one, so we could keep that going. Are you familiar with the history there, where they wanted us to cut back on the number of schools and we did not want to leave those schools that we'd been working with before, so we essentially wrote 2 programs. And luckily we were funded for both of them, and we have since been funded for both of them.
And that was somewhat recently, right?
That was probably, well, it was when Marty Wayman was here.
Right.
So yeah, it's within the last probably 8 years that we did that. Again, it's very important to know what you're writing about to get the funding.
And what about student support services? I know that's undergone quite a bit of change.
It has. It's gone through change. Early on, I did not write the original student support services. That was written by the EOP program people. But then eventually I became director of that also. And then we still had strong ties to EOP with their program. And it was kind of like a combined effort with it, with certain developmental courses. And then over the last about 8 or 9 years, we've pulled away from the EOP and have student support services students that way. And I've actually got a few of them in my classes who are doing internships. It's probably a better model now.
Well, I know there was a discussion about duplication of resources and
we tried to avoid that because
funds and things like
you were working with some of the same students, but you were also providing extra stuff, like some of the developmental courses. That's where we developed the science courses and some of the math courses. We were also cooperating with the math department, because that was a tough course for a lot of our students early on. They came in with really pretty weak math skills.
And I know EOP still does that. I know they have, Dan on McKinney full staff and still on their staff, and they still do a lot with that. SSS hasn't really done as much with that. We've done some things with their writing classes and with the biology class, but what changes in the national picture have you seen since you've
Well, the organization that we have now, Council for Opportunity and Education, that I was part of one of the first groups. Is that working?
Yep.
Okay. Well, when we had the American Association for Equality and Education, AEEE, which you probably are a member of, and that came into being probably in the 70s some point. We got organized, and then several similar groups came up around the country. It's just to kind of provide a forum for people to discuss some of the problems we were having. And so we had some classic national meetings where talking about the funding levels, the type of programs they expected everybody to implement. And then once we got the 10 regional organizations, I think that was the number. And then we ended up having something called the National Coordinating Council, which morphed into Council for Opportunity and Education. And I was at a few of the first meetings where we did establish some of that national organization. I think some of the meetings, we had about 20 people there. You could almost fit them in this room. But there were some people that were very involved in that. And part of it was a funding issue. I remember when Ronald Reagan wanted to zero out the TRIO programs.
All the TRIO programs?
Yeah, just zero out. And that was a big fight, trying to get people, a lot of letters going out, trying to do this. And that was one of the reasons we needed a national organization in Washington. And that group has since did a lot of grant writing workshops, a lot of lobbying work, also collect a lot of data. The opportunity report that we get with a lot of data and information that we can use to make our case they were collecting a lot of that.
Right.
And up until the time I left Upward Bound, I still went to all of those workshops
Yeah.
and national meetings, things like that. It was very important
Yeah.
to stay abreast of what we were trying to do.
Yeah. So did you get the opportunity to work with Arnold Mitchum at all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, that first meeting, there were about, as I said, about 20 of us.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty tight-knit group. I remember Larry Diaz, you from Columbia. Yeah, it was necessary to do.
Mm-hmm.
That whole organization now is so much bigger.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
It's been very effective in lobbying
Mm-hmm.
for increased funding.
Yeah.
It's been hard to get increased funding sometimes, but the programs do work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I think you can sell a message when the programs work.
Right. Right. What do you think has been one of the biggest challenges that, other than the funding, that programs have had to face over the years?
It's been for Upward Bound. It's been really recruiting students, new students, who some cases would rather work during the summer
Right.
than come to a campus in the summer, take classes, have study hours, have to be responsible for homework. It's not an attractive option for some kids.
Yeah.
But once you get some here, they buy into that. But as that became harder and harder to recruit students for an Upward Bound program where you expected them to do some work.
Yeah.
Student support services, some of the challenge naturally, the funding. I like when they decided to fund like the math science program. I think a big emphasis on STEM, and me being an electrical engineer,
Right.
that was right up my alley,
Yeah.
is to work on something like that.
Yeah.
It's, the major issue is funding and and writing the grant proposal to make sure you get funding. There's a lot more people out there looking for funds. Upward Bound, not as much, because that doesn't really affect the campus population. Whereas student support services and McNair are very attractive funds for most colleges, because they can help you do a lot of work with the students on your campus.
Right. Yeah.
McNair, whenever I've been to some of those workshops where they present the funding opportunity, there are a lot of different people from college campuses would like to get into that program.
Mm-hmm.
Usually they don't understand exactly what McNair does, but they're interesting meetings to watch.
Yeah. What do you think has been one of the biggest challenges for you personally as a professional, lifelong professional in TRIO?
It's very rewarding, as you know, or you wouldn't be doing this.
Right.
Right now I'm working with a program we have in Johnson City where we have students mentor middle school students, and I run some of the seminars with that. And I told students that's only the second most important thing I did. The most important thing I did was the TRIO programs and seeing students really make it.
Yeah.
Not everyone makes it, but a good share of them do. And finding out later when students, either they work for you or you find out how important Upward Bound was to them, and getting them a little more interested in school. That's a tough challenge now, getting people interested in doing their work.
Yeah.
I can imagine right now it's even tougher. That's why we have the mentoring program at the middle school. I think we got about 80 students in that this year. It's, and that program was started probably 20 years ago to address a need. They needed more in the Johnson City School District than they could handle. They needed some college students to come in and just provide some input to the young students. but I enjoyed every minute of being in Trio. It was, even the writing of the grants. And a lot of people would say, no, that's a chore. I look at it as something that's pretty, you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the grants, people look at the challenge of the decreased number of pages we have to write the grant. But those grants are better. If you do it in fewer pages, it's a better grant.
Yeah.
And I remember the worry that went around the country and the state about, we've got to now do this in 60 pages. Well, it's a better grant, but everybody has to do it,
Right.
and so it's fair.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now you had an opportunity to work with Upward Bound and SSS. How did you? Was there any collaboration between the two programs?
Oh,
or any,
yeah.
any type of pipelining? Did you have any interaction between the students?
Some students would come here of Upward Bound,
Mm-hmm.
and then they would be in student support services. We worked a lot too with the students with disabilities. And the university has since been able to get funding for that almost as a separate office now.
Right.
But at one point, that's how we got that office started, was with student support services funding.
Yeah.
And a lot of SSS students would then work in the summer at Upward Bound. Some of them would serve as tutors. There certainly was some cooperation and collaboration, especially when you got the one director. That's pretty much going to happen.
Yeah.
And
So you like that model with the one director over both projects?
I think it's important. They've gone back and forth on that in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
It usually depends on who's coming in to oversee the programs when you change administrations.
Yeah.
And sometimes people say, no, it should be one director. Others think it's a more efficient model by having one director with several programs.
Mm-hmm.
I think it makes sense.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned, and I agree, that this is a very rewarding profession, not monetarily, but with the.
There's more than money.
Yeah, exactly. So, what are some of your biggest success stories that you can remember? What do you think are some of the biggest rewards that you are proud of?
I guess it's seeing some kids go to college. I always tell one story about a young man we had in Upward Bound who really was tough to get him to do any work. He was a wise guy, tough to discipline. He ended up, once he graduated from high school, very bright young man, but once he got through high school, he started school up for about a year, I think, and then he went into service. And then when he came out, he was a different person, and he ended up coming here for graduate work. And while he was here, I had him working in our office. And I remember one day, it was about Christmas, and he was there, and I said, back when you were an Upward Bound student, if we could have foresaw the time when I would actually have given you a key to the office, so you were part of our staff. I said, neither one of us probably would have envisioned that. But it was seeing that chain of how the program started them off and how it helped them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of many.
Yeah.
I always wanted to get the students to do more math. And we spent a lot of time trying to work that out. But many students did go to college, and I think that's what it's about, and they have graduated.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you have a background in electrical engineering. I think that there's a hugely diverse background of TRIO professionals and what their backgrounds are, and how they got involved in TRIO.
Yeah.
How did you go from electrical engineering to working in TRIO?
I was burned out when I finished my dissertation, so I was looking for something different, just for a year or two.
Mm-hmm.
And that year or two turned into a whole lot of years. And it's like one of those things, you get involved, and you find out that you cannot get uninvolved. It's a tough program to leave.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was just kind of, you start, okay, I probably never intended to stay here that long, but it worked out very well. And you can see tangible results.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I started doing all the grant writing, and so I could impact other areas of the campus. And another thing that helped keep me here was I was allowed to coach baseball.
Wow.
And so I did that for 12 years, softball for 4 years, where most places I wouldn't have been able to do that.
Right.
So it worked for me. And I know a lot of other directors, when I was doing this, they had different backgrounds too. Some had the traditional background in some kind of human services, social work. But there were a lot of people with the political science, a math degree, history. And some had doctorates. Certainly most had masters.
Yeah.
But I think they really saw that they could make a difference. I know that sounds like a commercial sometimes, but it really is. Kids need attention.
Yeah.
I remember every once in a while in Upward Bound, a former staff member would come up, spend a week in our residence hall. But if that person kind of hung around and just started talking to kids, by the time that week is up, he would almost have a full load of things to do, because the kids just need so many different people to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that happen several times.
Yeah.
And I remember one young man, he came up and spent a week with us. He had a real big time job in New York City. And I said, would those people understand why you came up here for a week when you had a week's vacation? Come up here and spend it with us, with Upward Bound. I mean, that was kind of saying this stuff is important.
Yeah.
And that it does work.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, somebody in New York probably would not understand that
Mm-hmm.
very well.
Mm-hmm. Looking at the future, we talked about some of the challenges that we have already faced as, professionals within the programs, but also as a system of programs. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges looking to the future?
I think we'll probably have to change a little bit about how, especially student support services, we might have to spend more time working on specific skills that people don't have when they come in if they're going to be successful in different coursework. Having somebody being an engineer or a math major is a pretty hard job right now for a lot of students we work with.
Yeah.
Because they come in with a weak background in some of those subjects. It doesn't mean somebody can't do it. It's just that they haven't done it.
Yeah.
And we have to find a way to catch them up on some of that.
Okay, so Dan was the director from when he came in 1970 till I came in when I came in 2004. And at that time, the programs, student support services had been running in parallel with the EOP program on campus. And at some point along the way, the programs became pretty much synonymous with each other. There was no way to discern one program from the other. And after a lot of discussion and talking with the upper administration, it was decided that that relationship, which had become so intertwined, that we would disengage it a little bit so that the programs could stand alone. There was a lot of talk back in the early 2000s about losing funding. President Bush had zeroed us out. A lot of people weren't a fan of TRIO. A lot of programs were on the chopping block, and so it was one of the reasons was we wanted to make sure that the EOP program and the SSS program could both stand alone in case there were any financial difficulties that made either program become obsolete or simply gone. So that was the first part of my tenure, was making sure that Student Support Services was a program that could stand on its own. We hired new staff, we moved to a new building, had a lot of things going on administratively to make sure that that could happen. At the same time, there were changes within the Department of Ed structure. For a while, we had Larry Oxendine, who was very much a fan of data and numbers and proving that we were worth the money that the government was giving us. That, coupled with the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, changed a lot of what we were doing, the way we were doing it, and the purpose for doing it. And it was a pretty tough time. I think it was a tough time nationally for TRIO. I think it was probably harder for Upward Bound in many, many ways, but also difficult for Student Support Services. Not being sure if we were hitting our targets. There was a new push along that time to do all of our reports online, which caused a lot of problems for older programs. And so I would say in the last 11 years since I've been at Binghamton University, the biggest changes have been with the program's relationships with the Department of Ed. After Larry left the department, we had a period of time where we could breathe a little easier and we could regroup as a national program. And Dr. Linda Bird Johnson came on board, and instead of taking Larry's persona of "I am the boss, therefore you will do what you're told," she approached it more as the Department of Ed is here to be your partner. And so that gave programs the opportunity to grow and reach out to the Department of Ed for technical assistance, where during the Larry Oxendine years, I think the feeling was more that we just really wanted to put our heads down and hide. If he didn't notice us, we were doing something right.
So one of the things that you mentioned was the two programs, TRIO or SSS and EOP, were kind of commingled for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And when Dan talked about SSS coming in, it was early 70s or so.
I think it was 1971.
And so do the early SSS alumni even recognize that they're TRIO students, that they're TRIO alum?
So they do not. And that's really interesting, because when I interviewed for this position, I had requested the opportunity to talk with SSS participants to find out what they liked about the program, what they didn't like about the program. And I was really surprised when the response I got was, well, they're all EOP students, they don't even know about Student Support Services. So when I indicated that the two programs were intertwined, it was that the Student Support Services program had become part of the operation of EOP, and they were not separate at all.
Yeah, and I think that makes it challenging, a unique challenging problem for our program here, because other TRIO programs have a rich alumni base to draw from and to connect current students with. But
Even though we have a long history of having funding, we don't have a very long history of having a separate program with an identity for the students to take as their own. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult and it's very sad. And it does put us, I think, behind. But as I mentioned yesterday when we were talking, having the support of the Vice President's office and the support of campus broadly, when we get a few more years out and we have alumni that are out in the field working, making money, it will be very easy for us to utilize campus services to do fundraising and outreach to those alum. I think it's almost like we started over, but in starting over, it made it stronger.
Also, going back to yesterday, you talked about when you came to Binghamton. Mm-hmm. How did you get involved in TRIO to start with, and how did you end up specifically in TRIO at Binghamton?
So back in 1980 something, can't even remember when it was, I had left a position as the director of counseling at a small school in Indiana, and was looking for something challenging, looking for something still in higher ed, and there was a posting for an SSS director for a brand new program at a community college in Illinois. And I applied, and ta-da, they hired me. And I was there 8 years. I was there through 2 full grant cycles. In fact, I delayed coming to Binghamton so I could finish writing their grant for them before the due date. I didn't want to leave them hanging and not have the grant submitted. So I've been, when was it? I can't even remember, honestly. I think it was I don't know. I was there 8 years and I've been here 11. So I've been in TRIO for a really long time. I was the founding director of their Student Support Services program. And then decided that I wanted to expand my resume, have some other experiences, and a friend of mine sent me the posting for the Binghamton job. And in that posting it said you would have responsibility for Student Support Services and Upward Bound. Really wasn't looking to come to New York State. I was trying to get back to Michigan, which is where we were from. Decided to apply anyway because interviews are always, good thing, good practice. Talked to my husband about it. He said, you should apply. They're not going to want you anyway. So I interviewed in July. June. I interviewed in June. It was right around Father's Day. They offered me the job in mid-July. I was busy, mid to late July. I was busy writing the grant that year and ended up coming August 23rd of 2004.
That's impressive.
Yeah, I know. I can't remember when I had the other job, but I remember this one.
Yeah. So you mentioned programmatically, how things kind of were when you got here and how they've changed since you've been here. What changes nationally have you seen in TRIO programs since you started working in TRIO?
So it seems like every time there's a change in Washington, D.C., it somewhat dramatically impacts our ability to do what we've always done or what we've been told to do. So, for instance, back when I was still at the community college, there was a big push to use laptop computers, and there was a big push for technology and making sure that low-income students had access to use the technology outside of, having to go to a computer lab. And when I was at the community college, this was key. It was key because our students couldn't afford internet at home. This was back in the 90s. They couldn't afford internet at home. They didn't have computers at home. Dial-up service was horrible. It was very expensive. And so we were encouraged to sort of start these laptop loan programs.
Mm-hmm.
So my SSS program at the community college was only 150 students, which is pretty small, especially in comparison to what we have here. And so we bought 10 laptop computers, and that it was a highly, highly utilized benefit of being in our program. Since then, someone at the Department of Ed has taken a complete different turnaround of how we're allowed to use our funding, and laptop loan programs are now discouraged. I think that's not a positive change. It's a negative change. It strongly impacts, highly impacts our low-income students, because there's a belief system out there that low-income students, all students have laptops. No, they don't. And low-income students would rather put their money into having a really cool smartphone, thinking they can use it as a computer, but we know you can't do a research paper on a smartphone. And so their ability to sometimes access technology, even still in 2015, almost 2016, it's limited. And so in many ways it feels like changes in Washington, D.C., either at the Department of Ed level or even at the presidential level and congressional level, it impacts our ability to really respond to the needs of the student. Summer bridge programs, and I know you already know this, but summer bridge programs have always been something that we've been encouraged to provide. And residential summer programs for Upward Bound are required. And I think they should also be required for student support services. They're very expensive, and we're hamstringed. We're not allowed to bring students to campus and in any way use grant funds to pay for their time here. We're not supposed to use it to provide housing. We're not supposed to use it to provide food. We're not supposed to use it for the support during those summer programs. Well, how do you do a summer bridge program if you can't feed your students? And so I feel like it was too loose in the past. We didn't have enough oversight.
Mm-hmm.
My colleagues will kill me for saying that, but it's almost swung to the other side of it, where we aren't allowed to implement the programs that we know as professionals will have the greatest impact and the most positive influence on our students.
Mm-hmm. That kind of almost already addresses my next question, and that is, what are some of the challenges that you see moving forward nationally, programmatically, and also individually?
So outside of programmatic, so that's probably the biggest, those two issues that I just discussed are probably the two biggest programmatic changes or problems that we're going to face. Is how do we continue to pay for providing the services that we know our students need? I think for our program, one of the biggest problems, of course, is the level funding. As we bring in new staff, we know they have a shelf life that's maybe 3 to 4 years, tops. For highly skilled people, it's less than that. It's because we can't give them the raises and the benefits that their colleagues at other schools and other programs, or even here on campus. If somebody's a Harper academic advisor, their pay scale is higher, their benefit package is a little bit better, their flexibility is way higher, and they're not required to do a summer program. All of those things play into our ability to recruit and retain good staff. And it's a problem. Mm-hmm. It's a problem that is, there's no easy answers for.
Mm-hmm. Going back to another follow-up question, you have kind of a unique position, and there are several other TRIO programs that have a similar model, but your time is split between, and your salary is split between TRIO and a university position.
Yep.
How does that benefit the program, and how is that a challenge?
So the benefit, and I do believe this, the benefit is immense, especially looking backwards, and the fact that we were assumed into a state-funded program that was highly visible, but our students were invisible. Having someone who is at an executive director level, who interacts broadly across campus, talks about retention issues, talks about policies, talks about how financial aid can be used to benefit low-income students, talks about the overall idea of access for low-income students. Having somebody who has one foot in TRIO and one foot in the campus makes it much easier to have positive influence for policies that will help our students. I guess one of the examples I can go back to is the computers, right? So when I first got here, I invested in a computer laptop program because at the time it was still allowed. Over a period of time, it was no longer allowed and the computers died. The vice president, because I was able to talk to him on a broader level and I have more interaction with him other than just as a TRIO person, my words had more weight. He provided the funding to continue our laptop loan program. He's also currently looking for ways to help us with grant aid for students who aren't eligible for SSS grant aid because either they're not Pell Grant eligible or they're beyond their first 2 years of their academic program. So having a person who has that interaction with the vice president on a consistent basis only strengthens our position. It strengthens our visibility, and it allows us to have more influence with faculty, with Res Life, and it makes it easier to get things done. The downside of having one foot in TRIO and one foot somewhere else is that I can't always do everything for TRIO that I was doing previously because I'm involved in new student orientation, because I'm involved in negotiating new software programs that come to campus for tracking students, or because I'm doing a special project for the vice president that has nothing to do with TRIO. But I can do that because I'm not 100% paid. It's just the split focus. That becomes challenging. It becomes challenging because sometimes you kind of feel like that person who doesn't do anything at 100% because you're too busy doing everything at 10%. And that's the challenge.
You mentioned that the challenge for keeping staff is a real challenge, and for those who have been in TRIO for a long time and looking nationally at TRIO staff who have been here for a lifetime, really when you talk to them about what keeps them in TRIO are the success stories.
Right.
What do you have any memorable success stories about students that you've worked with, or about?
I have a lot. Community college is very different than what we have here at the university. Binghamton University is really structured around the traditional age student. They come in, they stay for 4 years, 5 years, and then they go away and they go out into the world and they're highly successful. Community college is a little bit different because people come and go, they come at different ages, and they come with different expectations. So one night I was going out to my car, and I see a gentleman who at the time was probably in his late 30s, early 40s, and he's just kind of looking around campus like, why am I here? And I walked up and said, hey, how are you? Can I help you with something? And he said, I don't even think I should be here. I think I'm just going to leave. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Let me help you. I know it looks a little big and a little scary, but tell me what's going on. And he had just lost his job. A plant had closed down, and he had been there for 25 years, and it was just a bad situation for him. And he was eligible for WIA, which is the Workforce Investment Act, blah, blah, blah. So he was ready to just cut and run and get back in his car and leave. And I said, no, come on. Admissions is still open. Let's go in. Let's talk to admissions. Let's talk to financial aid. And let's figure this out for you and get you started. So I walked in with him and introduced him to some people. He ended up joining Student Support Services. And he was one of those guys that he didn't really want to ask for help, right? He didn't want to ask for tutoring. He felt stupid. He didn't want to take part in anything having to do with the workshops because he might see people that were so much younger than him, and it took a lot of investment just to get him comfortable in his own skin and help him to see that he wasn't the only person in his situation. He graduated from the community college with his transfer degree at the same time I left. Didn't hear from him for years, and about 3 years ago now, which would have been about 7 years I'd been here. Not that, maybe 6. Anyway, I get this email from him, and he says, hey, Marty, I just wanted to let you know that I just finished my master's degree.
What advice do you have for new professionals in TRIO just starting their career off?
Okay, so here's the thing. We don't make a lot of money. Many programs at other schools are kind of hidden. They don't have the visibility that we enjoy at Binghamton University. And so what I would tell people is you need to get into a career that you love. You need to do the things that make you happy. And if you're the kind of person like most TRIO people are, you want to give back. You recognize that where you came from wasn't a place of privilege. And so you want to give back and you want to invest in the next generation. And so really the best advice I can give is to make sure that you're in a job that you're doing what you love. Love what you do and be engaged with the students. Take it forward. You can't be a good person in TRIO if you don't feel like you're making a difference. And so I really think that you kind of have to look at where you are. If you need more money, you're probably not going to get it in TRIO. But if that's not the thing that holds you to your job, TRIO's where you should stay. You just got to figure out where the balance is. And really, anybody needs to do this for any career. You want to be ethical, you want to be happy, you want to make sure that you have a balance where your family's taken care of, you have lots of love in your life, and you put it all together in a nice package and you move forward. And so I guess that's the advice, right? Figure out what you love. If you don't love it, get out. Because your students need you to love it. Your students need you to be engaged with them. And so figure out if it's for you. And if it's not, get out of the way and let somebody else in. I've been very blessed, and I know that I'm probably one of the luckiest people on the planet because I came into TRIO at the right time of my life that I could open up my heart and put the time into it. And I've been lucky that I've been able to not only stay in it, but expand my involvement. One SSS program at a small community college. Now we have 2 SSS programs, 2 upward bound programs, and I'm able to straddle the worlds between, the academic world and the university world and what TRIO provides and bring it together. And so that's my advice to everybody else is figure out your path and then stick to it. And love what you do. Or move on.